Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Bennington here with Robert Perry, and today we are talking about the hidden belief in specialness. This episode is inspired by two things. One is the section at the very beginning of chapter 24 called The Hidden Belief in Specialness, which we covered this week in our Course Companions program. And the other thing that inspired this episode is a series of conversations I'm hosting with course teachers Freedom Cartwright, Corinne Zupko, and Yolanda Batts on how we can all make the course community more inclusive for people of color. This is obviously a time when we are all being asked to look at our hidden beliefs around race and privilege. And so Freedom, Corinne, Yolanda, and I are talking about that in relation to the course community in a free program called Love Lens, which you can join by visiting circleofa.org/Love Lens. And given that so much of what drives the division that we see all around us is specialness, Robert and I wanted to get more into that here as well. So it's nice to be with you, Robert.
It's good to be back. This is such an important topic. It's an uncomfortable one because we course students tend to keep the course separate from social issues. And yet, the way the course talks about specialness, you really can't separate it from society.
Yeah, we were saying in our class that once you lift the hood on this idea, you see it everywhere. So where would you like to begin?
I think the logical place to start is in talking about just what specialness is. And I hear a lot of different understandings out there in the course community, but I think the obvious thing, which the course absolutely backs up, is that to be special is to be better than, greater than, higher than. And when I say that, every good course student rushes to say, or lower than. But A, that's not what it means. And B, that's a great illustration of exactly what we're going to be talking about, which is how we hide the belief in specialness.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's almost a reflex when you say specialness and that we want to be above. Course students do. I mean, I did it, so I'm no judgments here. I did the exact same thing. I was like, or below, because when we get to the darkest recesses of our mind, what we find is that we lack the confidence to go after our dreams.
Yeah, our core problem is we don't feel we're good enough.
Yeah, and that is acceptable, right?
It's a comfortable core problem.
It's a really, really comfortable thing, but it's masking the true motivation, which is specialness, and that's a little bit darker.
It's
and
harder
to admit.
It is. I mean, if you think about when you use the word like, he's a really special person, you know what you mean by that. You don't mean he's especially lower, right?
Mm-hmm.
You mean he's better. In some sense, he's a cut above.
And it's so much easier for us to say, well, I just lack the confidence to really go for it. My core problem is that I'm playing too small in life. That's easier for us to admit than what the course is talking about here with specialness, which is I want to be on top. I want to win.
Exactly. And the course not only describes it in that way, but it says that impulse is at the very root and core of the ego. It says that that's how the separation got started. We asked God for special favor. It says that sin, which is a concept that is obviously at the core of the ego, actually is a flower growing out of the root of specialness.
Mm-hmm.
So basically the ego's need to be on top, to win, is at the very heart of what the ego is.
And the reason this is so ugly is because in order for us to win, someone else has to lose.
Exactly. Yeah. Specialness is the ultimate zero-sum game. You can't be special unless others are less special. It's all relative. There has to be losers. If you imagine, the NBA finals are taking place right now. Well, those players who are at the very top of the world, Imagine if suddenly we engineered a bunch of, genetically superior basketball players. Well, the current top of the world players wouldn't be any worse, but they could be, they could be sitting on the bench all the game because better players are now on the scene. So you're only special in relation to others. You're only above if someone else is below.
And so, what we do in our quest for specialness is we attack. And we have to attack in order to achieve a position of specialness. We have to attack in order to defend any kind of position of specialness that we have. And as you were saying in class, I thought this was interesting that the position of specialness itself is an attack. Can you say more about that?
Well, it says, I'm higher than you. That's what specialness is. So, the very notion that I am special is an attack on others. And then, as you say, to achieve that place, we have to put others beneath us and we have to be the victor over them by definition. And then, as you also mentioned, and then once we achieve it, we have to defend it. And it takes a lot of defending.
So we talk a lot in course classes about heart of the ego being attack. And is the heart, if the heart of the ego is attack, is what it wants ultimately specialness? Is that it? At the end of the day, what it all boils down to is we want to be on top and better than. And we attack to get there. We attack to defend it when we get there. And that's just who we are, or who the ego is, rather.
Yeah, I
What the
think
ego
there
is.
are other ego needs, but I think this is the big one.
This is the mother.
This is the mother. Yeah. And I think it's worth saying that specialness has an interior dimension and an exterior dimension. It has a personal side and a public side. So interiorly, you are basically looking down on others. You're judging their sinfulness, so because that makes you seem more virtuous, a really core element of specialness. You're seeing yourself as above, but it's no fun if it's just you seeing yourself as better. You need others to share that point of view. You need it to be reflected in your public life so that
Mm-hmm.
people are seeing you as better. And ideally, you're occupying a special place in a social context, that place itself being a kind of physical statement that you're better.
Yeah, and this is the sneaky nature of specialness too. And I know we're going to get into more of specialness as a hidden belief, but we we can take pride in how humble we are, and then that becomes its own form of specialness. Do you want to say more about that?
Well, I think what that reinforces is the idea that as long as we have an ego, there is no getting away from it. So you have the people who are just openly out to trounce others and to beat them. Okay. Then you have the rest of us really nice people who are thinking, well, I'm not like that. I'm so much nicer. I am more virtuous. I am nicer. I am better. So the people who refuse to be the ruthless competitors in life and instead are more nice and cooperative, they are privately saying, at least I'm not as as rotten as that guy. I don't have that need to win and to compete, while we are basically feeling, morally superior to those guys. And then also we should mention that the course in the Manual for Teachers in the section on psychic powers, it has this interesting discussion that talks about people who are more spiritually advanced, and that's shown by the fact that A, they're uncovering unusual abilities in their minds, psychic abilities, and B, they've lost interest in material possessions. But now they uncover these powers, and their ego uses those powers to deceive themselves into thinking they're special. And now their ego has like recovered territory it had lost. And the point is that even people who are spiritually advanced and beyond some of these lower ego attachments still can get lured in by the desire for specialness.
Yeah, we saw that with Helen herself at the very beginning of the course dictation, where she obviously was hearing the voice of Jesus and wanted to keep it exclusive to her, or at least was tempted to for a time. Do you want to share that story?
Well, yeah. I mean, before then, she herself was uncovering psychic abilities and feeling proud and inflated over them, as well
Mm-hmm.
as afraid of them, but both sides. And then as Jesus started to speak to her, Bill had wanted her to receive guidance for him. And she thought, no, I shouldn't do that. He's exploiting me. That's dangerous for me. He's shirking his own responsibility to hear guidance with himself. I should stop this. And then she realized, oh, wait, I want, she said, she mentioned it as the exclusive idea. I want to have this ability that's only mine and that I use only for me. And there
Yeah.
was the voice of specialness.
Yeah. So right at work in Helen as well. That was some pretty good self-awareness though. So I guess sometimes it pays to be a psychologist, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
But I think just to wrap that little part up, everyone is addicted to specialness. Even the really calm, nice, mild mannered, meek people, if you scratch beneath the surface, they've got it too.
yeah, and one of the insidious part of the insidious nature of specialness is that it is a belief that operates by keeping itself hidden. And I
Right.
mentioned that we're studying now chapter 24, section 1, the hidden belief of specialness. And this is the course's big rollout of the concept of specialness. And so why is it hidden and how is it hidden?
Well, I think a great window onto that is that thing we mentioned earlier, where you say, well, specialness is the ego's need to be better than, greater than, higher than. And then someone quickly adds, thinking they're being really wise or lower than. Well, what they're showing is their discomfort with the notion that we all are striving to be higher than and better than. Because let's face it, it's uncomfortable, right? I mean, think about people that you are competing with in life. They could be coworkers, they could be friends, they could be siblings. Uh, do you want to say to them, you know what? I hope to win, and I'm frankly better than you. It's the last thing you ever want to come out, even though that thought is driving you, right? So it's very uncomfortable socially. Specialness is antisocial. And for that reason, it's uncomfortable on the interior because it makes us feel guilty. And so the Course is saying that when it's talking about as a hidden belief, it's not talking about hiding it from others. It's talking about we hide this belief from ourselves.
And is the main driver for hiding it from ourselves that it's socially unacceptable? Or is it that we don't want to feel the guilt that comes with wanting to be on top and wanting to be different and above?
I think the idea is that we don't want to feel the guilt of seeing our attachment to something that is antisocial, that is an attack on other
Mm-hmm.
people.
That is, but now we're getting into the bit of this where everyone can see it at work. We've all had those experiences where we have thought, whether it's at work or in relation to a sibling, as you mentioned, there's a million different examples of how we are playing a game of neutrality when in our mind we're thinking, I want that thing.
Right,
I see this at work all the time, when I used to work in corporate in particular, where you have to get along in the team because it's a team,
right.
but everybody's gunning to be the boss, and it's just the undercurrent at work, and so that's
But it's an undercurrent.
it's the undercurrent, right? Like you
Yeah.
can't come out and say it, but it's there, you feel it in the room.
Another example of this from the story of the Course is where Bill tells the story of how he got the job at Columbia, and they offered him this job, and he said, well, I'll take it if you make me I think a full professor, thinking that they would turn him down and he wouldn't have to take the job. And lo and behold, they said yes. So he just kind of backed into being full professor. Well, Jesus says that wasn't true. He challenged Bill on this and said that Bill worked really hard to get that position. He went for it while not realizing himself that he went for it.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it's part of the games that we play with ourselves. We really want something, but we have to convince ourselves that we don't want it that much, because if we don't get it, we don't want to suffer the disappointment of not getting it. And so it's like we have to trick ourselves
Or
around this.
maybe Bill was uncomfortable with something that was that sort of ambitious and competitive.
Hmm.
I think that's, if it was a specialness issue, that's what was going on there.
So was I just proving the point that this is uncomfortable for us to admit?
Maybe so. Maybe so. The more you think about this, the weirder it gets to look at human life and society, because you see we're all going for it and we're all acting like we aren't.
Right. So let's talk about that. Like how I think hopefully by now people can see the ways in which this is at work in our own lives. But how is it at play in society at large?
Okay. So there's a really simple logic that leads directly from the interior of the individual step by step to society at large. And it's just really, it's like inescapable. So, first of all, specialness is being above, better than, greater than. Okay. And to have it be satisfied, it does need to be not just in your own mind, right? It has to be acknowledged by others, reflected in the very structure of your life for it to really be satisfied. Of course, it never gets truly satisfied.
So it's
Um,
not enough that you think you're special. Other people have to think you're special too.
they have to think you're special. They have to be beneath you in fairly objective ways where everyone says, yep, they're beneath you, right? So every person in their own way, whether it's hidden, small scale, large scale, in a family context, something that small, or on a much bigger context, everyone is trying to be at or near the top of a little pyramid, right? Maybe you're in a family, a nuclear family of four, and you're one of the parents, and you want to basically rule the roost. You want to be the top of that very small pyramid. Well, that's one form it takes. But now imagine everyone is trying to be at the top of their own little or larger pyramids. If everyone's doing that on a mass level, what happens? Well, there's one more thing which we need to add in to answer that question, and that is what you might call specialness secret sauce. And that is this: specialness increases through proximity to other specialness. So, in other words, if I have a big store of specialness and you're a nobody, okay, you're going to want to be near me, but I'm not going to want to be near you, right? Because
Hmm.
you can't do anything for me. If I have a big store of specialness, I'm going to congregate with others who have big stores of specialness, because then we can benefit each other and up each other's levels of specialness. Okay. So we have two principles here. Everyone's going after being at the top of a small or larger pyramid socially. And then you add in the people who've got it, congregate with others to increase it. And then what you see is all those little pyramids, they start to coalesce into larger pyramids and into the whole of the giant pyramid of society
But
itself.
then they start to lose their pyramid shape, like the little pyramid shapes, and they start to become this big pyramid where those with wealth and privilege rise to the top because of the proximity to other forms of wealth and privilege.
Right,
And
right,
then it starts to gel at the top and reinforce itself through its own networking and its own connections and its
right.
own back scratching. And so that's one way in which we can look out at society and see oh my God, this is at work everywhere.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. Now, most of us like don't have hope of rising to the very top, and so we try to content ourselves to being at the top of as large a pyramid as we can manage. And if
Hmm.
it's just a nuclear family of four, well, okay, I'll settle for that. Uh, but the point is that we're all wanting that, and then of course by the fact that everyone's going for it and by the fact that specialness congregates with other specialness, you get that total pyramid and you get an elite who are near the very top of the whole shebang.
And then once you have an elite that's at the top of the whole shebang, then they start to enshrine their position so that it becomes harder for other people to get there, to climb that ladder. And so then it reinforces the specialness. And we see that everywhere too.
Yeah, that's really true. And that's a whole thing. I think it's worth just noting, mentally how many, I mean, the looking down on others, both individuals and groups, and treating them as less than and trying to be above them socially has resulted in a million basically marginalized groups. And some of them are huge, they're different races. Some of them are small, they're smaller populations. Obviously, this has been a huge issue in relation to women. It's also countries who are less powerful. There's like a million different groups that have been shoved down the totem pole.
Well, yeah, you and I were talking about this earlier in relation to women, and I was saying that if you want to establish a domestic hierarchy, then what better way to do it than to canonize men at the top? And so, even to this day, we have women taking wedding vows to obey their husbands because they think it's spiritually superior. I don't know. I mean, I refuse to do it myself, but
Do you think there's something wrong with that?
but if you want to enshrine your position of specialness, then one way to do that is to canonize it, put it in the Bible so it's there forever and can't be raised to question.
Well, and this gets us into something that I think is really important, and that is that there's this combination, and I want to go ahead and read a passage here from the course to get us into this.
And
In
I
that
should
section,
go ahead. I was just going to say I should mention that the same thing is true if you canonize homophobia and slavery. I mean, there's just
it's
so
endless.
it's endless, and
It's endless.
it's all different ways of doing the same thing, which is taking a small group and putting them on top.
Right, right. And, how many of us are lucky enough to be born, American or European, white males, born to wealth, got the best education? I mean, a few of us get that head start, but most everybody else is part of one or multiple marginalized groups. Most everyone is. Okay, so I want to read this passage here. This is from that section you mentioned at the start. All that is ever cherished as a hidden belief to be defended though unrecognized is faith in specialness. So he's basically saying the essence of all or the mother of all hidden beliefs, beliefs that are driving us, but we don't see them in us, is faith in specialness. But after I had quoted this a number of times, I saw this little phrase in the middle, defended though unrecognized. So personally, we have to defend our specialness, though keep it hidden. And then as you go up the chain and specialness forms these societal structures, they have to be defended, though unrecognized.
So that's really good because what again, another thing that we see all around us, and I'm thinking about this in particular in relation to the conversations that I'm having with Freedom Cartwright, Yolanda Batts, and Corinne Zupko related to the Lovelands series on how to make the course community more inclusive for people of color. So you take something like institutionalized racism, and you you find that if you're in the position of power,
If you're
you
benefiting from it.
you're benefiting from it, but you have to hold your racism, for example, as a hidden belief. So can we talk about that?
Yeah, well, I think there's several ways that specialness on a societal level as well as on a personal level is defended while unrecognized. And one way is you just say it's not there. And, I watched this documentary on Ruth Bader Ginsburg recently, and she is trying to argue to these Supreme Court justices before she herself was on the Supreme Court. She's making arguments before them, just trying to convince them that gender discrimination actually exists. And they found like thousands of laws that state it, but the justices were having a hard time seeing that it exists. And that's one of the ways in which specialness is defended, though unrecognized. You just say, it's not there.
Right. So you get into a position of power and then you say, what? There's no problem. I don't see a
Right.
problem here.
Right, because you're benefiting from the problem.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then
Okay.
because this is a hidden belief, you legitimately don't see that it's there.
Yeah, and that's at play on the topic of racism now. So as we have been talking about this idea more and more in the course community, some of the pushback that I've received has been along the lines of there's no such thing as racism. There's only one of us here. We aren't bodies. And don't you think that is just one way of not looking and therefore keeping this belief in place by virtue of the fact that you're not looking?
Yeah, well, I mean, on one level, there's no such thing as racism because there's no such thing as this world altogether. But on the level of this world, to say there's no such thing as it sounds like a metaphysical, course-inspired version of what people have always said, right? This problem you think is such a big problem, it's not actually there. So what's there to solve?
Yeah, and I know we probably should wrap up here soon, but one thing about this topic that's fascinating to me is there feels like there's two levels going on. One is when you just don't want to deal with a problem and so you don't look at it, but you acknowledge that it's present. And then there's this idea with specialness that it is hidden, it's driving you, but it's outside of your conscious awareness. And so what's the balance here between those two things?
Between,
Between just not looking at something, but acknowledging the
oh,
reality of it,
right.
and when we don't look because the belief is hidden.
Well, I mean, the Course is saying that in this case, we are highly motivated to not look.
Like we're
You know,
consciously pushing something out of our awareness in order to keep it hidden because we benefit from the system being in place as it is.
yeah, well, we're not consciously pushing it out of awareness. We're doing what's called repression. Suppression is where you consciously push something down. Repression is where you don't even know you're doing it. And, I've been teaching course students about specialness for a long, long time, and course students tend to be very nice, mild-mannered people, by and large. And it's those very people who have managed to really effectively deny their own belief in their specialness, their own need for it, their own pursuit of it, just like we're talking about in relation to Bill.
So if you can't acknowledge it, then you'll never see it at play in your life, and you can't heal it. And if we
Well,
can't heal it as individuals, we'll never heal it at the societal level. And that's why things are the way that they are.
I think that story that we went through quickly about Helen, and the exclusive idea is a great story in this respect, because she starts out by saying, I thought something had really gone wrong. Bill should not have asked me to get guidance for him. That was exploitation on his part, which was dangerous for me. And it was an avoidance technique for him. He was avoiding his own responsibility to get guidance. So all that sounds so reasonable. And while she's thinking that, she says it crosses her mind with no emotion whatsoever that maybe this is the exclusive idea. She's hanging on to, this is my special gift and I'll use it especially for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she had sort of the honesty and the know-how to say that that seemingly emotionless, like insignificant thought was the whole key. It was the real underlying thing, peeking a finger above the surface and making itself known. And so it's possible, right? She discovered that, and her discovery of that seems to be the catalyst that led to the course starting to come through. Because she was deciding this is not a selfish gift, it's meant to be used for others. So
Yeah.
we can do the same thing.
Doesn't it make you wonder, though, if she hadn't quote unquote passed that test, if she liked the exclusive idea so much, hearing Jesus as a channel exclusively so much that she ran with that and let her ego run the show, then would we have even gotten the course? So thank God
Well, maybe there were
she
4
passed
Course
that.
in Miracles that never happened because they didn't, pass that test.
So this is a pretty depressing picture. And so what do we do if we acknowledge that specialness is operating within us, which I guess is the first step? How do we
Right.
get out of it? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think there's a lot that we can do, but at a fundamental level, the Course wants us to make a commitment to the divine equality of everyone. We were all created equal, not as equal human beings, but as equal sons of God. Each of us is far more than a human being. We have to have a basic commitment to that at all times and seeing other people as our equals. Another thing is the Course is asking us to have a commitment to seeing specialness as our enemy, not our friend, so that we are pursuing what it calls the death of specialness within us. That realizing it brings us pain and guilt and strife and separation, not it brings us a sense of worth and happiness.
And that's a complete reversal of what we are
Of
currently
every voice in
thinking.
the world,
Yeah,
every
everyone's
voice in the
saying go
world.
for it. Every voice is telling us to be special. Every family member is trying to reinforce that. And society rewards it,
Yeah,
obviously. And
yeah.
so if you are thinking that specialness is your enemy and not your friend, then you're completely going against, it's countercultural.
It is. It's totally countercultural, as Jesus tends to be. And I think as part of taking a stand against it in ourselves, we need to be sensitive for the forms it takes. There's so many subtle forms. And, you often see them in other people more readily than in yourself. I do see, a lot of subtle sexism out there in people that don't believe in it, but they're displaying it.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to be sensitive to it in ourselves. We need to work at seeing the people that we currently see or have seen as beneath us as our full equals in God, and basically act to almost lift them up so that it's reflected on the outside. We treat them as our full equals, and we do whatever we can to reflect that externally.
Yeah, and one of the questions that arises around this is if there is no such thing as specialness, then how do you have hierarchy? And we need hierarchy because it's what keeps order in place. If you're in a business, for example, someone needs to be the boss, someone needs to be
Right.
the primary decision maker. And so the idea here isn't that the structure is wrong. It's that the way in which we're viewing others while in the structure is wrong.
Yeah, and we do need a certain structure where certain people, have authority, hopefully by virtue of being better at handling it. Um, but there are different kinds of hierarchies. Some hierarchies, most hierarchies exist so that the people higher up can dominate and exploit the people who are lower down. Um, but hierarchies can exist so that people who are higher up on the hierarchy, they're there to serve the people who are quote unquote lower down in recognition that we're all equals and I can use my position to benefit others, to be a servant. Now, everyone knows that a leader is supposed to be a servant, but how many really are?
Really practice that.
Yeah. So I think there's no problem. I mean, hierarchies will remain and they need to be there. Parents, I don't believe, and the course never talks like this, that we're supposed to see our kids as our teachers and, we're almost like we're learning from their wisdom. It's like the course's attitude is be the parent. Okay.
Mm.
Not the authoritarian parent, but be the parent.
And likewise, the course also talks about the teacher pupil relationship, and there's an inherent hierarchy in there as well.
Exactly. Exactly. But it says that the teacher is a teacher by virtue of greater ability and experience, but his or her goal is to give everything away that they've gained so that the pupil becomes their equal, even on this level, as a reflection of their equality in God. And so there's a lot to say there, but I think we shouldn't think of dispensing with all hierarchies. We should think of changing their nature.
Mm.
And one more thing I think about, we shouldn't just talk about specialness from the standpoint of how do we solve it if we're higher up. What if you feel, as most of us are in one form or another, that you're down the totem pole? What do you do then? And I think there's a couple really important things. One is you realize and you work to realize that in truth, you can't be hurt. In truth, you are equal. In truth, you're basically invulnerable, as the Course says. But another thing you do, I think, is you have compassion for the people who are higher up, because the Course says specialness is our enemy. So having more of it doesn't make us better off. In some sense, it saddles us with more pain and guilt. And so if we are lower down looking up, we should have a sense of compassion and a sense that the actions of those who are higher up are calls for help. And I think that's a huge challenge.
I imagine there's a lot of people who don't like their boss who are listening to you right now thinking, oh, that's a stretch.
Yeah, it is a stretch. But everything we're talking, any step away from specialness is a stretch, including all of the anger that comes from feeling like you are unjustly less special.
Mm-hmm. I feel like this is just one of those conversations that could go on for another 3+ hours. And at some point, we'll have to do a continuation of this discussion on specialness because there's just too many additional threads to go down.
I know there's so much. And I think that, like I heard you say on your Love Lens conversation, we aren't experts on social justice. But what the Course brings to the table here is an understanding of the fundamental building blocks of social injustice that I don't know if we can get anywhere else, like we get it in the Course.
Yeah, one thing that I appreciate about Marianne Williamson's message is she's always talking about how spiritual seekers should be not only the grown-ups in the room, but because we know what transforms the human heart, we know what can transform society. And what is society but a collection of individuals? And so I've always really appreciated that message. And let's hope that as the Course gets out there more broadly, that we will transform hearts that will in turn heal society in ways that that's desperately needed right now.
And lead to a more equal world.
Well, I can't end better than that. So thank you so much. And I'll see you next time.
All right.